Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Cartographer community meeting. This is our first session for 2022. So we are glad to be back and we really appreciate that you're joining us live or watching the recording. So thank you for being here. Let me share my screen with the agenda. This is not the agenda. There you go. So we encourage you to please add, it's optional, it's completely optional to add your name and organization to the attendee list so we can catch up after the meeting. The goal of this community meeting is to establish an open space to provide status updates to the community regarding the project and general discussion topics from users or maintainers. Right, so welcome again our new faces, Belishka. Thank you for being here. And also I see Joshua Locke. Welcome. It's your first time here. That's great. Okay, cool. Let's go to the next section. It's called TLDR. Here we share briefly what's new in the project and what team is working on. So thank you, Joshua, for filling this out. We have big news here, the .1 release, right?
Yeah, pretty exciting. The 010 release this week. There's a lot of stuff that went into this release. So I sent a link to the release notes here, but just a couple highlights that are pretty interesting is so one of the big features is best matching on pipeline labels. Which is the ability to be able to specify, multiple characteristics for a supply chain, and then having a workload be able to match based on like a best match, so it can match against multiple labels, and then it picks the one that is most accurate. So that's pretty exciting. We also have another big change in this release is we're using informers instead of short polling. This was a sweeping effort across the whole product. So hopefully things end up being a little more snappy. Things happen more immediately instead of waiting that polling interval. So yeah, you can check out the PR there, which links to the issue, which has a bunch more information. We also have a couple breaking changes in this release. So we spent a bunch of time reducing the controller permissions. And so that is a breaking change. And so basically what that does is now you specify a service account in your namespace that gets associated with a workload. And as the supply chain is operating on that workload, it assumes the permissions of that service account. So you can really lock down the permissions to just what you need to be able to submit all the objects in your supply chain. So that's a breaking change because you have to be a lot more conscious about the service account that you're setting up when you're creating developer namespaces. The other big breaking change in this release is a new param hierarchy. So we've updated the param hierarchy. So now a template in a supply chain can specify param. That param can be overridden by the supply chain itself, or it can be overridden by the workload that's propagating through the supply chain. And we have some precedence rules that get associated with that hierarchy. And you can check out all that stuff in the issue. So yeah, lots of new exciting stuff went into this release.
A lot of new stuff.
And then we've got some cool stuff upcoming. One of the big things we were working on right now is garbage collecting the resources that get created by a runnable. So right now the runnable stamps out a whole bunch of immutable objects, and those objects can accumulate over time. And those resources can tend to be quite expensive to keep around, especially if we're stamping out things like Tecton, task runs, pipeline runs, and that sort of thing. So we're introducing GC on the runnable that lets developers specify how many successful and how many failed items they might want to keep around, so that they can keep around the latest failed test run and maybe a couple successful ones, or whatever they want. So hopefully that'll help reduce all the expensive load on the cluster. We're also doing some performance benchmarking, just coming up with some recommendations on memory and CPU usage, and doing a bit of longevity testing, do some load testing, that type of stuff. And then finally, pretty soon we're going to start revisiting RFC 14, which is the artifact tracing, which is a very in-demand feature right now. So the idea is basically that we're going to be writing an artifact dependency graph to the status of the workload and deliverable, so that you can look at that and you can trace back all the different artifacts that got produced along the way with that workload or deliverable. So yeah, pretty exciting. Going to be working on that soon.
That's great. Thank you, Joshua. Yeah, I see that this release, I mean, I was having some issues running the examples in the previous release. Once I upgraded to that 1.0 release, issues are gone. So we encourage users out there to upgrade and use our most recent release. So that's great. I don't know if there's any additional comment regarding all the new stuff.
Oh, there is actually one other new thing that I forgot to put in the notes here is we expanded our examples and docs a whole bunch over the break. So complete overhaul of both. So if you haven't taken a look, please do. Feedback's obviously very welcome. So
I have a question actually. I saw the examples and they're awesome. So thanks to the team for all the hard work that you're doing. I had been working on like a supply chain delivery handoff that used a image package. And I'm just wondering if that's like, I don't know, thoughts on that, or if that's coming in the examples, or if you see like, or is it better? I don't know. In the Git, you can kind of see all the YAML, but the image package also, it has its own advantages.
yeah, for sure. It's not something that we have in our examples right now, but it's something that we have done internally before. And so it's, yeah, we know it works. Are you having success with that setup or?
Yeah, I got it to work. So yeah, and I think the reason that I kind of went down that path initially is that it alleviated me from having to do the Git setup. But then I realized the Git setup is actually not that bad with the SSH stuff, but like while I was struggling with it, and I guess I was interested to see what that package handoff would be. But yeah, it's working.
Yeah, for sure, right? I mean, if you're already building images, you're already pushing them somewhere. So a lot of the times it's easy to just, bring those credentials and set up your repository to push your config at the end to the same spot, right? So
I will say, I don't know if it makes any difference in like the Git scenario versus the package scenario, but like, there's a very simple setup where you just like basically get it to work, right? You publish the YAML however you want, and then you'll get it over Git or image package. And then there's like probably the fuller scenario, which I have not embarked on, which is to actually do it in a way so that I guess you're considering the customizations that people might want to do on the YAML, whether it's, I guess you don't have to add overlays, right? But maybe the values file, like the schema for the values file, like do you want to include that if you're going to have unresolved values in your YAML and things like that. So I think there's like maybe a more sophisticated use case. But I don't know if that would be any different actually between Git and image package. I have to think about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. it's not really something that we've started looking at yet, but yeah, if happy to work with you once you start looking at it. So.
Yeah, and
Oh, I have
I was just going to say that, you know, if you are interested in sharing that supply chain that writes to another place other than Git, be that image package or something else, I don't see any reason we wouldn't include that in the examples.
Cool. Okay. I think by the end of the week, I'll probably be at a place where I can actually share it. I did have I had a question on like, oh yeah. So I have a question kind of on best practices recommendation, which is, again, for simplicity, just because sometimes it's easier to take the short route when you're working on a hello world. But in the Git ops scenario where you're committing your deliverable sort of the ops configuration to a Git repo, do you envision that it's better to have one ops repo per every app repo, or that you would have like what I have is like an ops repo with a branch per app?
This is something that we're currently debating internally, right? Because obviously, like there are different setups that require a lot more configuration, and some that can be, you know, automated a bit more, right? So we don't really have a set of best practices right now, but it is something that we're currently talking about.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Cora, and welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Follow up from previous meeting, we have a couple of action items. One of them is by Rush. He's still out. It has to do with what is considered the public API. And another one was part of a discussion on how to start thinking on guidelines of what to include in docs and what should not be in the docs, so we can have a reasonable load to maintain docs throughout the life cycle of the project. So I just created that issue. It's here. So the goal is to start the conversation going. And once we reach consensus on this, to add the resulting criteria to the contributing doc, right? Okay, there you go. Now we have the open mic discussion section where you can add your questions or topics there. So the first thing we have here is that today we are joined by Velishka and Joshua Locke. They are from the OSS supply chain team that I believe is a kind of new team from VMware. And we wanted to discuss here, you know, the charter of that team and what potential collaboration areas could be between Cartographer and Valentin and Joshua's team. So welcome, Valentin, Velishka and Joshua, sorry.
Yeah, thank you for having us here. It's our pleasure to join your meetings. Joshua and I are part of the Open Source Technology Center of the Open Source Program Office. The Open Source Technology Center is the engineering arm of the Open Source Program Office of VMware. We are focused on the supply chain topic. The mission of our team is to provide architectural leadership and engineering support to existing solutions and to explore new solutions that could help mitigate the significant potential security risk of supply chain compromise. We are engaged with two groups of projects. On one hand, we are contributing to security frameworks, tools, and integrations. And on the other hand, we are supporting compliance tooling with focus on containers. Joshua is our supply chain security expert, and I'll ask him to share more about the projects that we are actually engaged with.
Sure. Okay. So, yeah, the folks on our team are heavily invested in the update framework, which is a kind of a design with reference implementations for how to do secure content delivery and update, ensuring integrity and freshness, and being able to recover from compromise. Primarily designed for kind of package managers and similar software update systems, but equally applicable to all kinds of content delivery, secure content delivery over a network. We're also involved in the SLSA project, which is a set of guidelines and requirements for securing software supply chain against tampering. And that's an open source project, part of the OpenSSF, Open Source Security Foundation, I think. I've completely forgotten what the acronym's for. And so SLSA is a relatively new project launched last year with contributors from a bunch of different companies coming together to define a set of requirements and collaborate on tools to achieve those requirements. It's a really interesting project for understanding the kind of the wider supply chain security problem space. We also have folks working on and maintaining a tool called Turton, which is a tool for understanding the inventory and license compliance footprint of container images. So it can generate a software bill of materials in a multitude of formats for a container image. Yeah, they're the big efforts I think we have going on. We kind of get called in, the projects kind of linking, a lot of supply chain security projects are all kind of interlinked, so Tough is heavily used in Sigstore, so we have some influence and contributions to that community as well. But they're the big three that we spend a lot of our time on.
Oh, okay, that's great. So, yeah, I don't know if you are kind of familiar to Cartographer project itself.
To hear more.
Yeah, I'm aware of the project. I tend to work at a level or two below Kubernetes, so I'm not entirely convinced that I understand like enough of the primitives to even be able to parse the Cartographer kind of introductory docs. I started looking when the project was first launched and started to stumble on some of the kind of Kubernetes, I guess, terminology. So yeah, I'm familiar with the project. I've spoken briefly with Washima about it, but I'm definitely interested in learning more and wouldn't profess to understand.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm not sure if providing a short intro to the project could fit here, because at least myself, I'm still trying to be able to articulate in a short time the main goals of Cartographer. But in general, you know, being a Cartographer, an open source project, heavily focused on cloud native supply chains, I was wondering what kind of support the project could find and on your team for the future, maybe.
So I guess I'll jump in and I'll try to give an elevator pitch for Cartographer.
Thank you.
At a really simple level, you know, you've got your path to production, and you know, you're going to start, as with all things, with some imperative code that's just like, okay, I've got to do all these things to get the software that I created to be some running app that my users can use. And as I iterate on that, I'm going to put in more compliance and more security. And as you do that, you start chunking things into groups of like, okay, here I'm focusing on like building an image, and like here I'm focusing on testing that image, and here I'm focusing on scanning that image. And so you, as you start to encapsulate each of those steps, what would be really useful is, what if you didn't have to have your own imperative code to do each of those things? What if there was some program that you could just call out to and say, here are a couple of, here's like a little bit of information about my code or about the previous steps that I've already taken. And I'd like you to do that step that I used to have imperative code doing. I'd just like you to, I'd like to hand you some declarative configuration and for you to just do that work and hand it back to me. And so that that process is what we refer to as choreography, and an inversion of control. And then Cartographer is a choreographer built on top of Kubernetes, where those programs that I described are all other K8s controllers. So for example, KPack, which is cloud native build packs in Kubernetes, saying, I don't want to write my own Docker files and like write all this bash code. I just want to say, here's my source code. Please give me an image, and I'll outsource the expertise of that image building to KPack. And so Cartographer is a tool that allows you to chain together different controllers that have their own areas of expertise to allow users to exist at a higher level of abstraction on that when they're thinking about that path to production. So I'll pause there and ask if there are questions.
I have a line of thought, I guess. Are you familiar with the in-toto project?
I think different members of the team to varying degrees. I know that it's out there. I know that for me, I think of in-toto as attestation. I'm not sure if that's the proper way to think about it.
Yeah, it certainly is that sort of thing. One of the similarity, and this might be just my brain making connections that don't exist, but part of in-toto is intended to be like a framework for end-to-end integrity of your software supply chain. So you define like all of the steps in your supply chain in a layout file, and then the framework tries to you generate attestations for each of those steps, and then the framework can evaluate a set of attestations against the layout and check whether the expected actions occurred and were performed by the permitted actors and those kind of things. So I'm hearing similarities between an in-toto layout and cartographer kind of choreography. And I'm trying to the reason I ask if you're familiar is to try and understand if that's a reasonable analogy.
Yeah, I would say that that's one of the pieces that I don't think that we yet have a great attestation story, and so that is particularly looking over the page that we just saw of what your team is working on between Tough and in-toto. I think that is a place that we definitely need to get to, right? Like that's going to be important for anybody using Cartographer. Anybody building an app platform on top of Cartographer is figuring out what does attestation look like, and in-toto definitely I'm familiar with it because I every month or two I hear somebody talking about it.
Right. So I guess there's some linkage to the RFC 14 that was touched upon earlier in the meeting, which I clearly haven't read because it's the first I'm hearing of it. But if that is trying to track the inputs into the choreographed supply chain, right, that's one of the things that in-toto attests to, and is like, yeah, effectively where all of the inputs, the defined and expected inputs, and so it sounds like there's some correlation there. Does Cartographer have that low-level view into what's happening within a choreographed supply chain, such that they could do like the in-toto term is artifact flow integrity, but effectively tracking all of the inputs and at which steps they used and things like that?
So I guess sort of two things. What RFC 14 is doing is reporting artifacts that came out of each, or reporting the artifacts that are currently exposed by resources in a supply chain. So in that path, each controller at a given time is going to have a status, and it's going to be exposing something. So, for example, KPAC is saying, "Here's the image that I've created." And RFC 14 is about all the values that are exposed at a snapshot in time are available on the status of the workload, which is like the driver of that supply chain, which that's one can reason about from there, looking at the shape of the supply chain and the definition of the supply chain and those values, what has been fed into each step. So I guess, to the question of, does Cartographer have, does the Cartographer system know all that information, what's being fed into each step? Yes, but it's not necessarily user-friendly at the moment.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good. There's possibly some opportunities for Cartographer to produce SLSA provenance, which is a specific kind of attestation to discuss, to effectively document, right, the inputs, outputs, and steps in a build, so that you can start to detect tempering in your software supply chain, which would be super cool. I think, yeah. So probably not here, but if wanted to follow up on that topic specifically, we could definitely find some time to do that.
And am I correct that at this point, my impression is that at this point that we would just sort of declare, like, we meet the criteria of SLSA. They're like different levels of SLSA compliance, and we would just say, like, we're level 3, and there isn't a certifying body or anything that we would go to do that. Is that?
That is true. Yeah, there isn't a certifying body. It's been discussed. I mean, SLSA is a new project, and it's new enough that we have a fairly good idea of what the requirements are, particularly because this is heavily derived from Google's internal binary authentication for Borg system that they've been operating for quite a long time now. But there's a bunch of open questions around things like how one actually does some kind of policy evaluation of generated attestations, how you do kind of storage and discovery of attestations and things. So the kind of the what to do is well understood, but how to make that usable for folks ingesting your software to make some kind of decision as to whether the produced artifact is what they're expecting before they take it into their own software supply chain is still an open area of development within the SLSA community, which is a very long way of saying yes, there's no accreditation. It's something that's being talked about, speculated about, but doesn't exist yet. I'm not even sure how we would go about doing it, whether there's any kind of desire or demand for it. SLSA is predicated on like some trust being anchored in the source control platform and the build platform that you're using in your software supply chain. So if you already trust, for example, GitHub Actions, and they tell you that they are, SLSA level 3 build system, I imagine most GitHub users would just kind of trust that. So the value of some kind of accreditation is not certain, I think, at this stage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'll hold off on any more hand waving. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, looking at these levels, I think the big question for us is going to be what is really thinking through what is necessary for meeting that and generate provenance. So we pointed out like RC14 is going to be a building block that we expect to be a step in the road to that provenance, to be able to say, hey, we picked up source code at this repo and the SHA, and then we've fed that into KPAC, and then KPAC gave us this image that lives in this registry. Like I can say that to a person. I'm like, okay, that's the provenance. But in terms of what's the expectation for tough, how would you encode that in in-toto? How would you kind of represent that as like, okay, this meets SLSA level 1? Are questions that I don't know the answers to.
Yeah, and certainly I don't either, though I'd be, be willing to try and figure them out. But that's part of that line of questioning is part of what led me to ask earlier about how much insight Cartographer has into the different steps that run. Yeah, so it's a similar kind of train of thought. All questions, no answers at this point, but I think it's an interesting line of question.
It sounds like maybe we should talk some more and do some demos to each other, maybe.
Yeah, that's cool.
Like we could leverage some of the expertise in the Joshua and Velishka team. So we encourage you to keep joining community meeting if you're able to, so we can keep the conversation going and keep sharing knowledge, because yeah, it's pretty useful. I don't know if there is any additional comment from the team or Velishka team. Oh. Okay, cool. Great. Okay. Next, and I believe final topic will be yes, as Joshua Winters mentioned, the team has been working hard on updating, improving docs, hearing feedback from our users. We have, for example, now a complete architecture section concepts that was missing in previous versions. So there's been a lot of time from the team building this out. It's been helpful, for example, for one-on-one users like myself. It's been really useful to finally start understanding how all the elements and concepts relate to each other. And what we would like to have from you out there is to get your feedback. If you have any improvement ideas on the documentation, you're welcome to add them as response to this issue. It is linked in the meeting notes. So with your feedback, we will be able to keep improving and improving docs each time. Right. So yeah, well, I believe that's it for today. I don't know if, well, I need to keep working on this. I don't know if there's any additional comment from team out there. No. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you again, Valishka and Joshua. I'll fix your name here. And hope to see you next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Nice day. See you.